Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. Today, we are talking to Susan Stubson. She is a sixth-generation Wyomingite. She is a Westerner to her core. Susan believes deeply in public service and celebrating Wyoming's rich cultural heritage. She is currently serving as chairman of the Cultural Trust Fund Board. She has a strong voice for the arts. She is a frequent contributor to the Writers from Wyoming series, as well as a speaker on issues of women in leadership. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
So, a sixth-generation Wyomingite. Where did you grow up?
Right. Proud of that. Born in Casper. Actually, my family roots, we hail from South Pass. So on my mother's side, she's a Harnsberger from Fremont County. Our family roots go back to when Wyoming was a territory. So I'm a sixth-generation Wyomingite, but my children are, if you can do the math, seventh-generation Wyomingites. And that's something that, as I get older, we're very proud of those roots.
Wow, I bet you are. And that's why you call yourself a Westerner to your core.
Right. Can't take it out of us.
Speaking of being a sixth-generation Wyomingite, I was reading an article you wrote, and it says that you are a relative of Calamity Jane. Is that right?
Yes. Hopefully. You know how family lore goes. Frankly, Calamity Jane's life was very much of a mystery, born largely due to the fact that she was illiterate. But there is a strong tie to our family. She was at some point briefly married to William Steers, who has a Steers ranch up there, which is a great, great uncle of mine. So however suspect that may be, our family is just unabashedly claiming her.
I love that. And why not?
Right. That's exactly right.
And you talked about her being a tough Wyoming woman. And that led me to think about how you view yourself as a Wyoming woman.
Oh, boy. Well, I know that we have some time constraints, right? I've actually been giving this a lot of thought. When I was writing that piece about Calamity Jane, it was really a fun exercise to put yourself in the shoes of these women 150 years ago, who the concept of suffrage and equality and what it means to be a woman and on the Western High Plains. I mean, I think that many of those issues were quite foreign to them, frankly. So it was kind of fun to be able to puzzle through those and apply them to today, right? So to your question, to be a Wyoming woman, it's complicated because in Wyoming, particularly those folks who are out in the rural areas, women are expected, we are equals. We're expected to carry the load, to bale the hay, to bear the calf, to do what we need to do. And yet at the same time, we're a conservative state, right? And so my challenge, I guess I'll make it personal, is to figure out how to be a conservative Wyoming woman, yet to not diminish my strength or not have our confuse that with a sign of weakness.
Right. So in terms of what is equal in Wyoming among men and women, you're saying that in general, women have to be equal because of how they live, how they're expected to work hard and be part of, all the heavy lifting.
For sure. And I think conservative women or women in Wyoming, we haven't actually figured out, to be quite candid, how to talk about ourselves and our values and our priorities without diminishing our position in the room, right? So for example, I'm unabashedly devoted to my husband and my children. I think nowadays you say things like that and you'll get a lot of eye rolls, at least internally. So my issue is how to be a strong Wyoming woman, frankly, how to be a strong woman without devaluing those things that I find the most important to me, which is my family.
Right. And so true. And as you talk about the tax on a woman when she takes a break from her work to have a baby, and she gets penalized for that because then she doesn't, do the track through the workforce like a man can do. Do you find that to be true? Was that your case?
For sure. For sure. I'll tell you one of the greatest stressors in my life early on in my married life as a young attorney, blazing saddles out of law school, right? Really ready to make your mark, also ready to start a family. With my first child, when I was pregnant, that was one of the most stressful times of my life. My firm at that time did not have a maternity leave policy. In fact, there was very few women there. And trying to navigate maternity leave and how to communicate that you are still a professional, still willing to put in the 100 hours a week or whatever you need to do, and still be a mom. That was quite a challenge. I think that we've come a long way since then, but boy, we sure have a lot of work to do yet.
So when you speak on issues about women in leadership, what are the topics that you cover? What is your message?
Ah, right, great. Well, it kind of depends on the group, right? Who we're talking to. Um, the obvious example is in my legal profession. When I first started practicing law, it was very much still a man's world. And so I mistakenly, it's taken me a long time to figure this out. You do what the guys in the room are doing, right? And so what I discovered is that the chest thumping and the loud mouth, which is not to suggest that all men do that, but as a woman, it has taken me quite a long while to figure out how to be myself, which is somewhat soft spoken, to not be the loudest guy in the room, to not be terrifically aggressive. Certainly, I'm not physically aggressive. How to be who I am as a woman and still be quite strong and be the best attorney in the room, irregardless of gender.
So you were saying that you had two boys, and so how are you passing on those values to your boys?
Great question. I think that we'll have to find out when they get out into the workplace and have partners and figure out how they navigate it. It's interesting because I only know raising boys. I have no girls. So my challenge then is to make sure they understand the female experience, right? They understand our differences, our strengths, our weaknesses, but most of all to respect that. I think one of the big challenges, and this is maybe old fashioned, but I'm gonna just dig my heels in here. I still think that men should open doors for women. My boys tell me when they try to do that, there's some pushback from their female friends. I put that frankly on us. That's on women to figure out how to be respected, to be treated with respect by all, and yet still to be honored as a female.
Oh, that's a good point. Because some people would probably think that you are perpetuating a stereotype, let's say.
Exactly. So has the pendulum swung too far? I don't know. Where do you draw the line between being honoring and respectful of one another and being demeaning or buying into these awful stereotypes, right? There's a fine line. And I think if you're a young man, I have teenage boys, boy, that's a trick right now for them to figure out. And as a parent, I'm not sure if I'm giving them great guidance. I haven't quite figured it out yet.
So, have you talked to your boys about the hashtag Me Too movement at all?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and it is hard to tell how much of their information and where they're getting from that information. I think that at least in my household, it's very clear what is happening and why it's happened. And I think, although frankly it's been a little awkward and uncomfortable, they would probably tell you that, is to share some of my own experiences in the workplace, socially. And I know as women, we have all had experiences where men have stepped over the line. And so, although it's not fun to talk about those things, I've for sure been visiting with my boys about that to say, hey, listen, you may be saying things and acting one way, but let me tell you what it looks like from our side. So we're talking about those things. We'll see. It's a treacherous time for young men. I'm biased, obviously, but it's a really, really difficult time to be a young man and to try to navigate this whole gender conversations.
Right. If someone doesn't teach them the boundaries and they're having to figure out those boundaries, but of course, everybody has different boundaries. What one woman might think is okay might not be okay for another woman. So I think it is tricky.
Absolutely. And, young women, they're navigating it too, right? They're trying to figure out, what is it like to be a young woman? What is it like? How do I dress if I want to wear something that's suggestive? I like this, how to navigate those kind of things and figure out those things amid this Me Too conversation is really difficult. I think, at the end of the day, we need to step back and give everybody a little bit of grace and a little bit of a space to figure out how to navigate it.
Well, I think that's interesting because there's so many different viewpoints, and some people have a zero tolerance for anything that has to do with a man overstepping his bounds, suggestively or otherwise.
Oh, absolutely. And it's generationally. I'll tell you just a quick story. I'm a pianist. And this week earlier, I was in a high school playing for a music festival. And one of the older clinicians called me dear. He said, "Oh, that's just wonderful, dear," right? And it was really fun. You could just feel this immediate shift in the room where the young women all kind of made this eye contact like, what the heck? You can't do that. Frankly, I kind of think, well, I take no offense to that. That's a generational thing that for me personally wasn't threatening. I know for many women it would be, but that's kind of exhibit A about these things we need to figure out on a case by case basis, on a day by day, hourly basis. And it's not easy. And I don't think that there's a bright line. So to your point of zero tolerance, for sure, there's some things where you draw a zero tolerance line. But boy, there's a lot of gray area that we have not yet figured out how to talk about.
Oh, so true. Well, I want to go back to the other thing you just mentioned, that you have a passion and that you play piano. Tell me about your journey. And first of all, that you began formal piano studies at age 8, and then you had a whole career path there, and now you're an attorney. Tell me about that.
Right. It's a great story. Everybody asks me all the time. Yes, I'm a pianist. I'm a classically trained pianist. I went to Eastman School of Music, which is a music conservatory in Rochester, New York. I have my degree in piano performance and literature. It is what I do best. I love a lot of things, but the thing I do the best is play the piano, which isn't to say I'm the best pianist, but that's the thing that I am the best at. But when you are a musician, making a living as a musician is terrifically difficult, as we all know. So, of course, I made my living where most artists do, which is in New York City or a highly populated cosmopolitan area where there is more room for jobs. So I lived and worked in New York City for a number of years, and I got to a point in my profession where I was rocking and rolling and playing for great artists and just really professionally having some really, really extremely high-level playing performance experiences. But the reality was I was lonely. I am, as you said in your very kind introduction, I am a Westerner, and I think that there's something to be said about being indigenous to your environment. And I am not a city person. I need open space. I need to be around people who want to get on their bikes and go outside and traipse around and shoot stuff or whatever. So ultimately, I made a decision to come back home, come back to the West. I also made the decision at the time I was playing at the Metropolitan Opera as a rehearsal pianist. I made the decision that I did not think that I would have, frankly, an artistically fulfilling profession that I had in Wyoming, for example, than I have in New York City. So I went cold turkey, cut the cord, took the LSATs, applied for law school, and came back to Laramie and got a law degree.
And what kind of law do you practice?
I am a corporate attorney. I do a lot of commercial transaction.
Oh, okay. But then when did you pick up and start playing the piano again?
Well, when it's something that you do and it's the one thing that you're best at, you never really leave it. So I never actually really, really left the piano. I've always played, continued to play, and I would play a couple of concerts, maybe one or two concerts a year. And every year it seemed to grow bigger and bigger. Early on, thanks to many of my friends back east who would be traveling through the Rocky Mountain region and would be in need of a pianist, as luck would have it, the great irony is that I left New York City and I left this great profession, and now I'm kind of back to where I was, and I'm playing with great artists, albeit not on an everyday basis. I play, 6, 7 concerts a year, mostly with visiting artists, and I practice piano as much as I practice law.
Wow.
Sometimes more.
And because I'm with the Wyoming Humanities, how do you think that we can make the arts and culture, be a driving force and a real important fabric of our state?
Right. Great question. I think this is probably an unpopular view, but I think that our recent dip in the economy can be a really great moment for those of us in the humanities community to say, hey, listen, all of this conversation about diversifying our economy and making Wyoming more livable, it's right here in front of you. The humanities folks, the art, the music, the dance, the theater galleries, those are the things that people want to do. They want to go to a place to hear great music and to see great artistic pieces. To me, this is a really great time to exploit that conversation, if you will, and really bring it to the fore and say, hey, we're here. Why don't you start putting your money with your mouth where your mouth is and really start investing in the humanities, and let's see what happens. Let's sit back and see how many people decide to move their company to our community, because it's a beautiful, fun place. It makes us feel good. It's great to sit out on the lawn and hear live music. We want to go there.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much for saying that, Susan. And it has been so wonderful talking to you. Thank you for being with me today.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is an important conversation, and I hope we can continue the discussion. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the equality state. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.